What is your full name, sir?
Arnold Gabriel,
Where and when were you born?
in Cortland, New York, on May 31, 1925.
So how old are you right now?
92.
Do you feel like you're 92?
No, I feel like I'm 64.
Physically, though, talk to me about what it's like to be 92.
Well, there's some things that you have no control of, your bone deterioration, your teeth, especially your teeth bones, tend to deteriorate, and there's nothing much you can do about that. But I try to work out 3 times a week for an hour to keep my body somewhat supple. So I think I'm doing pretty well.
What branch of the military were you in during World War II?
I was in the Army in the 29th Infantry Division in Europe.
What division, what regiment, and what company were you in?
Well, at first I was in Company E, the 116th Regiment in Europe, in England, where I trained. And right after D-Day, about D+2 or 3, I don't remember because it's a blur, I joined I Company of the 175th Regiment of the 29th Division.
And what was your specific role in both companies?
Well, I started out as a ammunition carrier for a machine gun squad. But right after D-Day, about D+5 or 6, I became an assistant gunner.
Talk to me about the role of a 30 caliber machine gunner in combat.
Well, the ammo carrier pretty much does, as the job description implies, you carry 2 casks of ammunition, each with 300 rounds. And an assistant gunner is the one who feeds the machine gun belt. Of course, the gunner is the one who actually fires. But each of us tried to learn the other person's role. In case 1 or 2 of us were killed, we could always assume the other position. So if the gunner were killed, the ammo carrier would become the gunner. So you had to learn all 3. Even as an ammo carrier, you had to learn to field strip the 30 caliber light machine gun blindfold. And the idea of that is because if you had to change the barrel at night, you could do it without seeing anything.
And a machine gun squad, talk to me about where they are in relation to the riflemen.
Well, you're pretty much up with them, and pretty much, as an example, with I Company, if the first platoon of I Company was on the attack, you would be at, there are 2 machine gun squads, you'd be one at either end, at each flank of the platoon to fire what they call enfiladed fire. And I think I pointed it out in my book that I had to learn all the terminology of a 30 caliber light machine gunner, and one was enfiladed fire. And I can remember when I got battlefield promotion from private to staff sergeant, I had to go back to the battalion commander to answer questions. So I memorized all the definitions, and all he said is, "Gabriel, do you know what end of the machine gun that bullet comes out of?" I said, "Yes, sir." That's all, Sergeant. But enfiladed fire, to answer your initial question, was at each flank. And so enfiladed fire means that the beaten zone of your fire coincides with the long axis of the enemy. So you fire along the flank, so you have maximum amount of firepower.
And tell me, how many days in combat were you in?
Well, I've never really counted them, something over 200.
And what was the highest rank you achieved by the time you left the armed services?
Well, the Army, I was staff sergeant. I was a battlefield promotion from private to staff sergeant. And I was promoted over a buck sergeant. And he didn't feel badly about it because he just felt I had more leadership qualities than he did. At least I was a high school graduate and he wasn't, so.
Now, you mentioned, just talk to me about where you grew up.
in the little town of Cortland, New York, about the middle of the state near Syracuse, New York.
And what do you remember about growing up in the Great Depression?
Well, you're right. I was a Depression baby. I was born in 25, and of course, the Depression was 29, and it lasted about a decade. So we had very little to eat. My mom and dad bought a little corner Italian grocery store for back taxes, which they borrowed about $300, and they bought the store. And that's where I grew up. And it was an Italian ghetto. My mom and dad spoke, of course, Italian very well, but spoke enough English. They became American citizens, but all our clientele were Italian. So I had to learn Italian to deal with my customers in the store.
What were the first few jobs you had growing up?
Well, first of all, in the grocery store, we did that. My older brother, who was 2 years older than me, when my mom and dad, during the Depression, my dad worked in a bar, and my mom worked in a garment factory. And when my brother and I, when we were 10, 12 years old, we would actually run the store while they were out working. So that was one of my first job, was working in the store. And then when I was 15 years old, in addition to playing football for the Cortland High School football team, I worked in a bakery. And that meant getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, taking the bread out of the oven, put it through the slicer and wrapper, and I actually drove the truck through the bread route in the little town of Cortland and the neighborhood town of Homer, New York, and delivered that when I was 15 years old and didn't have a driver's license.
Now, your folks, where did they immigrate from?
From Italy. Both of them came over separately, and they met in Brooklyn, where they were married in Brooklyn, New York.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what it was like growing up as an Italian American in the 1920s and 30s?
Well, I don't think many people realize that there was a great deal of discrimination in those days, particularly in the high school. Fortunately, I played in the band and played football, but the entire football team, about 10 of the initial starting 11 were all Italian, so I didn't escape that element. The band, fortunately, was several ethnic groups, so at least I had a chance to interface with some of them. And I guess it was music who got me out of the ghetto.
Were there any specific instances, things that you saw or heard around you that really made you realize there's a Great Depression going on?
Well, the fact that we had very little to eat, and I can honestly say that my mom and dad, in all of the years that I knew them, never went to a movie, never went to a circus, never went to a carnival, never did anything of an entertainment. Of course, we didn't have television either, but so they ran that store literally 24/7.
How did you hear about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Well, my best friend, Tony DeLuiso, who was also Italian, obviously, we went to the movies, and going to the movies didn't mean that we paid. We always snuck in the back door. But we did that so often that the manager said, I don't know how you guys keep getting in, because I closed all the places I thought you were coming in. He said, just come through the front door. And he let us in for nothing. So we were at the movies, and we went to the pool hall after the movies and heard about Pearl Harbor. I was 15 years old at the time, and I thought, well, I'll never get into this. I'm only 15. Japan's only a small country. This is going to be over very quickly. Well, of course, it wasn't, because I got in the war.
What was that like to hear that your country had been attacked?
Well, I didn't think it was going to be very much. I knew it was Pearl Harbor. I knew that it was pretty disastrous. But I knew that I thought Japan was a small country, but didn't realize the expanse of the armies and the navies that they had. So it did last more years than I thought. And of course, then the Germans got into it, and so it became literally a world war.
Did you want to be in the infantry to start off with?
Well, no. Initially, when I was 17, I came to Washington, D.C. and auditioned for the United States Navy band program. And I passed the audition. And it was the first time, by the way, I was out of New York State. Took the train from my hometown. And my older brother was working at the government printing office, so I stayed with him. Took the trolley car down to the Navy Yard and auditioned. And I had a letter which indicated that when I got drafted, I could ask for the Navy. In those days, when you were drafted, went to the induction center, you could ask for the Army, Navy, or Marines. Of course, the Air Force was a part of the Army. And so I presented my letter, and they said, well, as of June of 1943, when I was drafted, well, actually I enlisted, they said those letters are no longer good. Everybody's going to the Army, which really upset me. And so that's why destiny played a large part in my life, and that was just one of the very first things that destiny had a part. And so I went into the anti-aircraft 50 caliber machine guns mounted on a half track. Didn't like that at all because they were actually death traps. And I had a friend of mine from Binghamton, New York, who rode down with the train with me to the induction center. And he said, I'm going to go fly airplanes. I said, well, I'll go with you. So we went to Keesler Field to take the test to see if we qualified to be a pilot. And so we took a series of psychomotive tests and psychological tests to see if we were fit to be pilots. And both of us passed. And we went to the University of Buffalo in that fall of '43, where we flew Piper Cubs as a part of the Army Air Corps. And then very early in 1944, June or January, February, anybody who had been in the ground forces were returned to the ground forces at the convenience of the government. That was in a quote. And my older brother, by the way, was also in the ASTP, the Army Specialized Training Program at Brooklyn College. So all of us were returned to the ground forces. My older brother became a military policeman, and I ended up with the 78th Division.
Lightning Division.
Yeah, right. And I just read somebody, it was somewhere, I forgot where it was, about the exploits of the 78th Division. And so I didn't like that. I volunteered for overseas, which is stupid. And it ended up with Company E of the 116th in England with the 29th Infantry Division.